Do you ever get the feeling of wishing you could live in a simpler time when the world wasn't as crazy and everything wasn't so upside down? Well, we can't go back in time, but there are times when it's great to be able to escape the rat race and live, even for a day or two, a bit more like the pioneers would have lived, in a much simpler way. Well, I don't live in my little off-grid cabin, but I love to go there and spend a day or two there, and even though I do have some of the more modern conveniences there, basically it's much a simpler life when you're up there, without a lot of fancy modern gizmos, but with everything that is needed to have an enjoyable and relaxing time. And so it was that I headed up there on this mid-autumn day. It was threatening that it was going to rain, and though it wasn't raining when I initially got there, it wasn't too long before the rain did start to come down. And here you can see a whole lot of sheep running to find some place to shelter. Well, I'm glad that I have my porch roof, and I could stand there and watch the sheep without getting wet. And there's actually something quite calming and peaceful about hearing rain on the roof, especially when it's not super windy and the rain's just pretty much coming straight down. The rain never got really heavy, but it did get pretty steady for quite some time, and it was a rather cold day too, of about 8 or 9 degrees Celsius, which is in the high 40s for those of you who do Fahrenheit. I was glad I had lit the fire as soon as I got there before the rain came down. And by the way, you can't quite see it in this shot, but just over the back on the other side of the ravine there is a rather beautiful waterfall, and of course that will be getting fed by all this extra rain, and that sounds great in the background as well. This is now the 4th video I've made from up at the cabin, and since the last one I have installed 2 IBC water tanks to catch water from the kitchen and the bathroom roof. I still haven't got anything hooked up on the main cabin building yet, but I was up there to see how it was performing in catching water into the 2 tanks. And I'm pleased with how it was working. When I got there, the 2 tanks were about 1/3 full. Each of the tanks has a specially designed black cover, and I have over the top of that shade cloth which acts as a first filter for the water coming down, and then I have some homemade filters which I've made from plant pots and insect netting screen. The black covers will stop algae from growing in the water, and the filters will catch everything that falls off the roof to stop it going into the tanks, and as well the insect screen will mean mosquitoes won't be able to go in there and breed as well. I have a piece of alkathene pipe running between the 2 tanks to equalize them, and each of the tanks has a tap from which I can get water filled into containers. The cabin is a dry cabin, which means it doesn't have any running water, but I use things like a foot pump to pump water from plastic containers into the bathroom sink and so forth, and I covered that more in a previous video. And now having these tanks, I won't have to keep bringing water to the cabin. I'll be able to catch it off the roof, and that's a major bonus, and it's another useful addition to this cabin project. Also, in one of the previous videos I covered the solar power system which I have hooked up in the cabin, and that enables me to run a small chest fridge and lighting and various other appliances, computers and so forth if I need to, charging cell phones and those types of things. I also have a small gas hob for cooking on, and that is what I use most of the time for heating water and cooking and so forth. The main kitchen is in its own separate little building, which you can see here. That's where the little gas cooker is and the fridge, and the food is kept and things like that. And I began to prepare a meal to cook, but I'm going to cook it in the main cabin on the wood stove because the weather's cold. I've got the fire going. I figured I may as well cook the whole meal in or a little wood stove. I put some vegetables into a little cake baking or bread baking dish because I don't have a little roasting dish up at the cabin, and using one for a lid and another one to put the vegetables in. So then I took them from the kitchen and put them into the little oven, which is kind of small, but it is still an oven nonetheless, in the little wood stove in the cabin. And that wood stove does more than just keep the cabin warm, it certainly is useful for cooking on days like this when it's cold. After a few minutes I took the vegetables which I'm roasting out of the oven and just turned them over. Vegetables, by the way, include potato plus sweet potato, or kumara we call them in New Zealand, and carrots. After the vegetables had been cooking for a few more minutes, I got a frying pan and began to cook some steak, tomato and eggs, and also put a pot on the stove with just some dried peas and a bit of water as well. With the fire crackling away and the steak sizzling, it's a sound that I gotta say I really enjoy, and I'm going to enjoy eating the food of course too. See the little lever on the front of the wood stove? Basically what that does, when it's in the upright position, it's sending the heat all around the whole stove, but when you open it towards the left, the heat goes straight up the chimney, and it definitely gets the fire hotter, but that's at the expense of the hot plate on the right hand side getting much heat, and also it acts as a damper, so you go through more wood when it's fully open of course than when it's closed, but you'll hear the difference and see how red it begins to glow on the chimney flue when you have it fully opened out. Closing the little damper lever and you can hear that it quietens down, goes from sounding like a rocket to being quite quiet, but it also means the heat's going right across the top of the stove so it gets both of the hot plates more evenly. Well, now the food's ready and it's time to serve it up and see what it tastes like. At this point I decided using those red oven mitts was just a bit too clumsy and awkward, and I resorted to using a leather glove instead, which I actually found a lot easier. I always like to add a bit of salt and pepper, and also for steak, Worcestershire sauce. And now for the best part, getting to eat it. Tastes pretty good. Potato tastes amazing. Steak tastes good. Tomatoes good. Let's try these coumaras or sweet potatoes. Oh man, this is one nice tasty dinner, I can tell you that. Wow, it's very beautiful. And you don't get roast potatoes tasting any better than that. I'm very happy with this dinner. Try a bit of carrot. Yep, that's good. An egg. Even the dried peas taste great. Man, oh, I wish I could share it with you. It's a very, very tasty meal. Well, I'm going to enjoy the rest of it without you. I don't know why, but somehow food just seems to taste better when you cook it with fire. And after dinner, what is better than to have a cup of coffee? You can't beat a nice hot cup of coffee. Had a really great meal. Coffee finishes it off. Just nice to be able to sit back and relax and enjoy it. Job chapter 5 and verse 7 says, "Man is born unto trouble as the sparks fly upward." And the truth is that we all have difficult times, but even in the difficult times it's great to have things to be grateful for and to thank the Lord for. And I am certainly grateful for this cabin, and I thank God for it. During the night the rain stopped, the sky cleared and the temperature dropped to around about freezing. And in the morning when I got up, this is what I saw. These wild fallow deer are certainly graceful creatures, and I took this footage standing on the porch before they saw me. Once they did see me, they disappeared back into the forest. Wild deer are, of course, always a potential source of food. And speaking of food, but this time for deer, these young trees that I'd planted surrounded by my electric fence, this is what they looked like at the very start of the autumn, just as they were colouring up. Unfortunately, even though the property is surrounded by an electric fence and it's quite high, there must be a weak point, and I think it is the gate, which is lower, only 2 wires and not the full height. And the deer had obviously got in since the last time I was at the cabin and decimated these trees, which I wasn't too impressed with. I can tell it's deer damage and not possums because of the broken stake in this case, and also they've been munching on the webbing ties that are holding the trees, and the possum I don't believe would do that, and the possum certainly wouldn't break the stakes. So unfortunately I wasn't too happy to see it. They attacked every tree that didn't have extra protection around it. Luckily these ones in this other little enclosed area were left alone, so those are the fruit trees. But as I mentioned, the weather was completely transformed from the night before, and here are some shots of what it was looking like in the morning, with a light frost on the ground and snow on the mountains in the background. It was stunning, absolutely stunning view first thing in the morning, and with the fire going, keeping warm, what a great place to be. Folks, I hope you've enjoyed this video, and maybe it'll inspire you to do something similar if you possibly can. Remember to subscribe to us at aminutemidnight.com. God bless. This is Tony saying goodbye, and hopefully we'll be back with more videos in the very near future.